This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning, and can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning we will be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Please can everyone make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent to avoid any interruptions, and that includes Surface Pros as well as phones. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies for absence from Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you very much. And can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare?
No.
And can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
And can we note the completed, ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee?
Okay.
Excellent. So we now move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our guests, Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and Sir Mark Rowley, QPM, who is Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here. So we are going to now move on to our questions, and I should have this already at the right place. So our first questions are about the Met's resources and the response to austerity, and we're really looking at many of the issues that were raised in the Casey review in the second chapter of her review, and we're going to be starting off looking at the Met's workforce. So a sort of opening question for the Commissioner. What is your ambition for the makeup of the Met's workforce, and what steps have you taken to meet the challenges in achieving that ambition?
Thank you. I think it's worth in terms of how we deal with these questions, if it's okay to reflect back on how we got to where we are and therefore how we need to go forward. So in terms of the workforce, I think there are three issues I think worth talking about in the budget going forward, about the balance between specialist and frontline, the balance between officers and staff, and the balance between money spent on people who are delivering versus the money spent on the support that they need in terms of technology and training and leadership, etc. The history of austerity is challenging for policing. I was reflecting in anticipation of this. There was a report in 2010 by Sir Dennis O'Connor, then Chief Inspector of Constabulary, who had some of his career in the Met, and some of you may have come across him from time to time. And as Chief Inspector, they looked at the start of austerity, what could the police service bear? And they published a report in 2010 which concluded that the police service could probably cope with a 12% cut in resources if it did some very imaginative and dramatic changes without damaging service to the public, assuming demand didn't change. So that's, I think, a baseline to start from before there were much greater cuts than that and the challenges that the police service has faced. During that time, in various different ways, from particularly from the previous mayor and the government, there have been targets and incentives to spend as much money as possible on police officers in different ways. And so that has meant that the weight of savings and cuts has been borne by the non-people spend, which is a small proportion in policing, and also by cutting staff, both staff in support functions and operational functions like PCSOs. So we land in a situation where I think the balance of spend is completely out of kilter. So, for example, we have about 5,000 fewer staff than we had a decade ago, which is fairly evenly split between reduction in PCSOs and reduction in other staff roles. That's a massive change from around 15,000 to around 10,000, I think, using rough numbers. And also, capital grants stopped in the sort of first part of the last decade, and with pressures as well to spend a smaller proportion of the budget on support functions, that squeezed areas like technology. It led to a massive estates sort of change programme. So you've got that picture where you're cutting support resources, you're selling buildings, you're trying to move forward on technology but in a squeezed environment, and that changes the shape of the organisation. So that's where you get to today, and that's what I've got to wrestle with, and that's what Louise calls out very powerfully. I mean, she talks, doesn't she, about police officers doing back office roles. She talks about poor equipment and training for officers. So she in a sort of vivid way, colours in the effect of an organisation that's out of balance. So here we are today, where if we were spending per head of population in London on policing what we were a decade ago, and I'm talking about the policing of London bit, taking out the sort of the national security parts around counter-terrorism and protective security grants, which are ring-fenced. So the policing London part of our budget, which is about 2/3 from government and 1/3 from the mayor. If we were spending today in per head of population in real terms what we were a decade ago, we'd need to be spending about 27% more, £878 million. So that's a big amount on top of a £3.5 billion budget. So we're a lot smaller, and we're out of shape because the balance is now towards police officers, which is great, but that's not so great if you can't sort of train, equip, support them, sort of, and provide the right facilities for them. So then going forward, to sort of answer your question, is the challenges for us going forward isn't simply about, oh, can we have some more resources? We need to have some more resources to do X or Y. We've actually got to change that mix. So, and I think we've got to change it in those three ways. We've got to strengthen the foundations of the organisation. You'll see in the London plan that point of, so giving officers the right technology, the right equipment, the right clothing. I mean, sort of being an organisation which buys the cheapest trousers and coats for officers isn't great when it's cold and raining and you're cold and wet and miserable in February. Getting the best technology, because every good organisation is now increasingly technology-led. Investing more in training of sort of officers and their leaders. So sort of fixing those foundations is part of it. Secondly, changing the mix of officers and staff. We've got well in excess of 3,000 officers doing jobs that should be being done by police staff. So our sort of developing strategic workforce plan, which isn't as refined as I wanted to be one day, but we've got a developing plan. We would like to put those 3,000 officers back onto the streets over 3 years if we had the money to hire sort of 3,000 police staff to take on those jobs, which frankly they would probably do at sort of lower cost because you're paying for particular skills rather than the generic skills of police officers, and they'd do them better because they'd be more specialist in HR or training or whatever else it might be. So that we want to do that, and where our budget is currently settled, pending any further conversations with the Home Office, we have the money to do about 300 of those so far, rather than we'd like to do 1,000 this year.
So a tenth of
the
3,000 that you need.
Nearly a third of what we want to do this year, but a tenth of what we want to do over 3 years in terms of bringing those people in to put people on the front line. And then the last point is the balance between specialist and local. So in terms of this year's budget, we've made. So we started with about a 400 million gap, which was a combination of a bit more than half of that was financial pressures, inflation, change in legislation, that sort of thing, and a bit less than half of it was new Met for London investment costs, such as the civilianisation and technology and other things I've spoken about. Sort of, in terms of closing that, we've gone through a very sort of tough over the last 2 or 3 months, sort of almost like a zero-based approach, not as deep as dive as we need to do over the next few years, but a first attempt at that, and we we've made 4.5%, 161 million of sort of savings and cuts. And I would distinguish to it. Some are sort of deliberately cutting that to be able to invest in that. Some are savings and things you can do more efficiently. And then we found there's sort of by some sort of financial sort of issues around sort of treasury management and things, there was another 30 million. And then the Mayor has added sort of significantly more on top of that. And that between that, we've managed to balance the books in terms of the pressures and start to cover some of the ground we wanted to in terms of our new Metropolitan investments, but not as much. And that takes us into some of the things we'll probably talk about. So as we do that rebalancing, that's a long answer, but hopefully that sets the frame.
It's a very helpful answer, though, because it does it sets out the situation you're dealing with. So the getting these 3,000 staff jobs sorted, that is because it kind of makes sense to be, rather than having police officers doing those sort of back office functions, it absolutely makes sense. Do you have a sort of time scale for when you're hoping that will be fully resolved?
So we've set an ambition of 3 years, so 1,000 a year for sort of 24, 25, 25, 26, 26, 27. That's based on a sort of being I'd like to do it a lot more quickly, but I think the ability to recruit and the sort of, and frankly, generating the money from sort of the Mayor or the Home Office or through trying to find other savings sort of is not something that's going to happen at that speed. So we've sort of tried to be realistic and set it over 3 years. It's doubly important that we start the journey this year because we do have a workforce and a police officer headcount which is going backwards. The challenges of recruiting. So there's a sort of strategic intent, but there's also a practical reality of the difficulty of recruiting in London. Our retention numbers are good in terms of police officers. Our recruiting is not. And because whilst we control police staff pay, we do not control police officer pay. It's sort of national pay arrangements, and we are sort of going backwards and predict going back further next year. So at least if we can balance that going backwards by putting more officers on the front line, at least we're sustaining the strength of the front line, even if it's not there's not too much net growth.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Could you just share any reflections on the composition of the Met's workforce, and also how Londoners can have confidence in the model, given that we've heard that it's all a bit out of kilter at the moment?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, it's very clear from Baroness Casey's report, and especially in the chapters you're looking at today, about how the Met has been pushed out of shape, as the Commissioner would talk about it. And you can see in the figures, not only were police officer numbers coming down, post 2016, but you can see in the figures from 2010 to 2018 that police staff were falling. That stopped in 2018 and started to reverse and go back up, but we've not got back to the same position as that there was in 2010 in terms of police staff numbers. And that is obviously a really challenging issue, because you want police officers to be doing the jobs that they are trained to do and have the expertise and skills to do, rather than doing jobs that police staff can do. You need the right experience and the right skills in the right places. In terms of what we are doing from City Hall to support the Commissioner's right ambitions to make sure that police officers are maintained and police staff numbers rise. There's an additional over £150 million in the budget for this year, and that's additional on top of the long-term funding since 2016 that the Mayor has put in. I mean, the Commissioner talks about the balance of funding. The balance of funding has gone from 19% government funding into the Met in 2016 to City Hall has increased from 19% funding to the Met in 2016 to 27% in the budget that's being proposed for next year. So it shows you how the balance is changing. And then, of course, within that, we have the problems around the National and International Capital Cities grant, which is also pushing the Met out of kilter. We are working with, and we're doing, as the Commissioner has talked about, there's been a huge amount of work between MOPAC and the Met around the budget as it is at the moment, and we have still got work to do in the run-up to setting signing off for me to sign off the final budget, in terms of looking at the prioritisation, looking at the delivery of some of the priorities that the Commissioner wants to deliver for London. So that does mean looking at estates, it does mean looking at the data, and it does mean looking at in some ways at modernisation and how quickly that can take place. Really clear. The Mayor's put in extra funding for PCSOs as well, but we have got significant recruitment challenges. So it is about what budget there is, but also what's deliverable in terms of the recruitment of officer staff as well as police officers.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Assemblymember Hall very briefly for a follow-up.
It's just a clarification, please. So if warranted officers are doing staff members' jobs, do they still count as frontline officers, or are they then counted as a member of staff?
They're counted as there's not actually a national measure of
Microphone. Microphone.
Sorry. There's not actually a measure of frontline officers. The measure that, for example, in the national workforce targets that government has is just a total officer headcount. It makes no judgment on what they're doing.
Right, because if they're warranted officers, we would say that there's 34,000 frontline staff and around 10,000 staff.
That would be incorrect.
That would be around about what it was last time. I know you're dropping numbers like a stone at the moment, which is worrying for all of us. But I'm just thinking, if you were doing, well, not you obviously, but I mean, if a PC was doing the job of a staff member, would he be counted as, in your terms, as a staff member and go into that head count?
No.
So he would still go into what we always think of as a frontline.
Yes, which is why I said when you use the word frontline, it's incorrect, because there are lots of police officers in non-frontline roles, and of course there are some police staff in frontline roles. So think of our call handlers, think of our PCSOs, they are directly serving the public. Think of our scenes of crime officers.
No, I get all that. I was just concerned as to where the numbers are, and obviously the wages they're being paid is completely different than if they're doing a staff member's role and they're paid as a warranted officer. But
you end up in this situation, so it's clearly not the best way to run an organisation.
No.
So I'm not pretending it is. But if you have workforce targets centred on the numbers of police officers, and you lose money if you don't sustain those, you end up taking the majority of your cuts on the police staff side. And if those cuts go too deep, the roles end up being backfilled by police officers, and you end up with a workforce that's in completely the wrong shape. And I had just a number I was going to try and pull out in terms of, if you look across the country just as a benchmark, I'll find the exact number in a moment, but we have a much higher percentage of officers in support functions than other police forces do. So that sort of indicates that we're more leaning in that direction than others. Which is obviously unhealthy.
For time, I'll leave it there, but it's a very, it's the counting of it that is of concern, but thank you, I'll leave it there.
I'd also like to point out that police can be women as well as men.
I do know that, but it's a very...
Sorry. Assemblymember Duval, you wanted to come in briefly as well.
Just going back to the recruitment and retention issue,
yes.
It's very good news about the retention issue, because that was a long-standing issue. But going back to recruitment, have we really bottomed out, evidence-based now, of what the recruitment problems are and why there is a reluctance to join, to be honest, in that sense? Because your strategy is right about aiming to get people in back of office, off that front line, whatever the front line is, back onto the front line. But that's going to take time, as you said. Recruitment still is an issue.
And
so what is it that's stopping?
I don't want to workforce going backwards. I think the majority of it is affordability in London. One of the questions that people have asked me regularly is your recruitment problem a reputation issue in terms of the things that hit the Met? And that's a perfectly proper question. Now, if I don't ask it now myself, I'm sure one of you will probably ask it. And whilst we can't rule out that being a factor, the prison service in London has massive vacancies and has to bus officers around the country. Probation has record numbers of vacancies in London. Education and health have by far the highest percentage of vacancies in London compared to its other regions. I know other parts of sort of public sector. So I think there's something about public sector pay in London with, as cost of living and house prices and things are moving in a certain direction, the current arrangements in terms of a national pay scale with a London allowance isn't working across multiple public sector workers. And so in terms of this year's pay negotiations, we've put in our submission recently for police officers, and I think there are probably three things required. I mean, the national ask, which I agree with, is about a pay rise which keeps up with inflation, a changing the initial starting point pay, so you lose the initial starting point because police pay is much less competitive in your first 2 or 3 years as an officer, so changing those pay scales in the early point. But then the third point for London is the London waiting needs a sizable change, and we've said that we think it needs at least £2,000 to get anywhere near sort of property prices and affordability in London.
Okay, so that's going to take some time to address, isn't it? Because that's going to be with you for a bit like the issue of moving staff around into the right places and the right spots in terms of tackling crime. But if that's the case, then should we not try and jump ahead of the policy debate and then talk about the different mixed teams required for tackling crime in the future? Is that not some of the models and some of the work that's been done in the past about the shape of those teams? And no doubt one of the other questions that comes to mind is the way that Met policy of moving staff, prioritising issues, the firefighting, plugging the gaps or not plugging the gaps in terms of performance issues that comes to light. Are those things being looked in together, or are they being treated separately?
So that they are being. So our resource management is one of the things that comes out in this, and so our management of resources hasn't been good enough. We're getting better at it, and that's one of the things we're strengthening because that's a sort of foundational issue, and that ranges from day-to-day deployment through to long-term planning. So if we had complete freedom on workforce numbers, we would pick a very different balance of officers, staff and other skills, and sort of in both operational and support functions, because in operational roles ideally we'd have more PCSOs and we'd return, we started sort of last year sort of 1,600 below the number of PCSOs we had historically in neighbourhoods, and the Mayor put in money to grow by 500. We're going to do over 100 of those this year and probably another over 100 next year, and that's more limited by recruiting than it has been by money. That's the first point there. But also there's operational skills and things like cyber and fraud and technology that we would want. So we would want to make that mix differently if we got rid of all those pressures. So there's a balance point, which is yours, the one point you're making. The second point is the size of the organisation. I made that strategically. I don't think it's big enough, but the mix is completely out. In terms of our deployment is too chaotic, and we are improving that, but there's some way to go. I mean, we have started. So if you look at the recent protests, which have been a big drain on frontline policing over the last 3 or 4 months, we've started changing the balance in terms of the officers we're using for that and taking more from non-community roles, so that you're sharing that out differently. And one of the things we actually have in the budget going forward is we want to increase our number of public order trained officers to give us a way of sharing that load in a different way, so it isn't always those closest to communities who get drawn out.
Thank you.
Now, Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor and Commissioner. Commissioner, just to focus on this issue about why people are not joining. Of course, we all know the cost of living it drives everything that goes on in London. But of course, many people who apply to the Met won't even live in London. And I start there because what do you think your frontline officers are saying to members of the public who are saying they are thinking about joining the police?
So we're an organisation in the middle of change with lots of difficult issues that we're confronting, from sort of changing the way the workforce is, changing training, confronting standards issues. So I think a lot of officers will be very positive, but some wouldn't be entirely positive. I'm absolutely sure about that. But I do think the sort of that's another way of asking the reputation question. The fact that the whole public sector is struggling in London is the thing that tells me it's more about some base common issues like pay. But that doesn't mean that we can't work harder at different methods of recruiting.
I think I asked the question in that way because I think it's more than that for the police. If you look at the pay scale of a police officer compared to jobs in particular, it starts high. The police has a real attraction that you know for a fact it will improve, which many other jobs don't have that. I think your issue is as much that, if not more, reputational, and a lot of it is about to do with morale and the way in which your officers are speaking about the experience they are having. You only have to look at what happened with your armed officers. I say this because I speak to a number of young people who are thinking of joining the force, and they are now beginning to seek out police officers to speak to, and every one of them that speaks to a police officer comes back in a worse condition than they left. And is somebody doing something about that internally, is my question.
So you sort of hint towards a particular issue. There is a real fragility at the moment in officers' confidence to act. There's been a range of cases around officers making fast-time operational decisions where, as an operational officer, it's hard to fully understand why the response in terms of the accountability response from other bodies is as it is. And that's one of the reasons I know that the Home Secretary, the previous Home Secretary, ordered an accountability review in terms of how those issues are dealt with, and the current Home Secretary supports that, and that's still being finalised. I think getting the balance right so officers feel supported when they're making difficult decisions to protect the public is absolutely critical, and that is making officers' confidence quite precarious.
Thank you, Charles. Stop there for time. Thank you. Oh, yes, I do.
A couple of questions to the Deputy Mayor, I think.
So my question to the Deputy Mayor, you made a comment about the amount of funding, the proportion that's come over to the GLA, to the Mayor. Do you think that's a problem? Do you think that's correct?
I mean, the Mayor is always prioritising policing, and safety is always going to be a real priority, well, number one priority for him. But yes, I do think that's an issue because... Sorry, is there feedback?
Yeah.
No, it's not you. Okay. Is that better? Yeah. In terms of the proportion of funding that comes directly from council tax, I think that is a problem because I think council tax is a regressive tax, and actually it should be from national taxation that policing is funded across the country. If the way that policing is funded is dependent on your council tax base, that is not fair and that is not equitable. So yes, I do think that's a problem because it means that not only in London, that Londoners are bearing the burden of funding the Metropolitan Police, and that the Metropolitan Police obviously has national and international capital city responsibilities. So the Commissioner's already talked about protests. The council taxpayers of London are paying for national protests in London. So there's a number of issues about how policing is being funded at the moment. And I think there really does need to be a look at the balance between what is council tax and some business rates that's going into the Met and what should be government funding from a fair and equitable taxation base, but also fair and equitable when you look at the responsibilities and what the money has been spent on.
We're all Londoners, and we have great sympathy for the cost of the police to police ourselves, as it were. But what would you say to someone who says the Mayor currently has 630 odd million pounds, more than £500 million extra? What would you say to those people who look at London, say London's the richest place possibly in Europe? They would suggest that we should pay for our own policing. Don't you think that's correct, that we should take on more of that?
I go back to what I said around, of course, the Mayor is prioritising as far as he can, prioritising putting funding into the Met, and he has done so. The Met's had £1 billion worth of real-term cuts since 2010. The Mayor has doubled the funding that's going into the Met since 2016. So he is absolutely, he's absolutely delivered on his promise to prioritise policing. However, we do need to look at what the burden on the Met is of its national and international capital cities responsibilities. We know from previously that there was the independent evaluation of how much that cost. The Met have refreshed that and brought it up to date. We know that there's a gap of £250 million from government funding for those responsibilities, for the protests, for example, that is a significant burden, not just financially, but a significant burden actually operationally on the Met. Frontline officers being abstracted from local policing and local communities, as well as senior officers who have to take operational control of that. There is a significant burden on that. So I think it should be that the government steps up and rebalances the way in which the Met is being funded.
I mean, we all would like to get money all the time from the magic money tree, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who would say of £630 million extra, the Mayor should take some of that burden. That's what I think a lot of people would be thinking. But I want to move on to the Casey report. Baroness Casey's report said that she saw no evidence that the Met Police had an evidence-based approach to workforce planning. To what extent do you believe the Commissioner has improved workforce planning in the Met? I will come to you, Commissioner. I'm not going to speak about you like you're not here. I will come to you. It's written that way, let me be clear in my defence.
So I hesitate to speak on behalf of, well, I will not speak on behalf of the Commissioner, and he can very clearly outline everything he has done since taking control and since taking control, and his new leadership team taking control of the Met, in terms of really looking at what the skills are, what the demands are, and where the workforce should be. And he's already touched on that, and we've had conversations already many times in Police and Crime Committee around that. So compared to the picture that is painted in Baroness Casey's report about a lack of planning, a lack of understanding, we are streets ahead now in terms of, and we've seen that through this budget process, in terms of right sizing of budgets, really looking at where officers and staff are, where they need to be, how much it costs, and making sure that the budgets are right sized. There's substantially a lot more work to be done, and that will be done in the next year around that. It really has changed in terms of that planning. There's a significant amount of work already being undertaken and will continue to be undertaken. I think it's interesting when you read Baroness Casey's report, in the particular chapter we're focusing on today, when you look at some of the things she talks about in terms of that lack of planning, the lack of understanding, initiative-itis as well. And you can see very clearly coming through that the work of MOPAC and City Hall and the scrutiny and oversight. There's two examples in Chapter 2 of where we have been asking and challenging the Met and the previous leadership. Where is your workforce planning? Where is your understanding of what's needed? You know, the Mayor is quoted in the report as asking the Commissioner, what do you think is the police officer numbers that you need? No answer. And then the quote from a senior leader about not having a crystal ball is in response to oversight board meetings asking what is your, on a particular issue around detectives, what is your understanding of the number of detectives you need, the impact that's needed, and how, what your plan is on that. You can see it very clearly. I wouldn't get the same answers to that now, because I know that is that type of planning and understanding analysis is underway, and there's more work to be done.
Thank you for that. I think there's two questions I want to ask here. One is, what is your comparator? Because you are saying that you are doing better, the Met is doing better than it was, but they were doing terribly beforehand, so that's a very low bar to clear, and you may be a higher bar, let's just test that, but doing better than they were is not satisfactory, because the two examples you gave are pretty horrific. And what are you doing in particular to make sure that this learning is retained? Because much of the conversations that we have with the Met and also with the Fire Brigade, we've known these problems for years. The Mayor has been the Mayor for 7 years, and only now are you dealing with those things, even if you're dealing with them properly? What are you doing to make sure that we don't have to, in 7 years, again, reinvent the wheel?
So within the budget and within growth last year as well, and the new Met for London plan that Commissioners set out, there's very clearly a pillar about fixing the foundations. That fixing the foundations work is really about making sure that the structures, processes and understanding and analysis of what is needed from the workforce and the demand and the skills that are needed is there. There has been funding from the Mayor in order to, from the Mayor for this budget around fixing the foundations and ensuring that that happens. And of course there's going to have to be ongoing oversight of that, and that's absolutely right and proper. In response to the Casey review, we have set up the London Policing Board. That really is a significant, and we've talked about it before here as well, significant step forward in terms of the scrutiny and oversight and the public scrutiny and oversight, and that will be ongoing. There is a committee on people and culture, and we expect that committee of people and culture to be absolutely part of its remit will be to look at how has that workforce plan developed, is it fit for purpose, and how is it being implemented, and what has the impact been. So that ongoing oversight will continue.
My worry with both of those structures, one is very political, very public. This strikes me as a very highly professional activity to retain these learnings, to build the systems, so we're not back here in 2, 3, 4, 7 years time. So I'm not as confident in your response as I hoped that I would be. The question I would then ask you is, one more time, is do you have the mechanisms? The last time you sat in front of us and we talked about that part of the report, I was much happier with what you said. It felt like that you had ongoing procedures that would continue to solve those problems. I'm not hearing KPIs about, the workforce plan going into the future, how you make sure that we don't arrive at this point again.
Bailey, can you get to
I'll get to it.
Get to a question.
My point is,
these are quite a lot of assertions.
My assertions are based on the answer I might add, Chair. What mechanisms do you have to make sure that the workforce planning continues? How will you scrutinise that process? Do you have a group of meetings going forward, an agenda item somewhere? How do you know that you will continue to see this improvement because you at MOPAC will push for it?
So one of the things we've done since the Baroness Casey's report, and we've discussed it as well, is we have looked, and rightly looked, at what does this mean for MOPAC, what does this mean for our oversight, and also what does it mean in relation to setting up the London Policing Board. How do we ensure that London Policing Board has impact? How do we ensure that there is a work plan going forward which picks up the key elements of Baroness Casey's report and tracks it through to new Met for London and tracks through the impact? Those structures and processes are, the work plan is being developed, the oversight is there, and there hasn't been a change to the processes that I talked about last time, so I don't really understand why you're now saying
because you were answering a different question then, you weren't talking about the workforce plan.
Well, in terms of the workforce plan, of course, the usual way in which we do oversight, the way in which I've described oversight previously in terms of the bilateral meetings that I have, the meetings that MOPAC officers and the boards that they sit on within the Met, they sit on a workforce people and workforce board. That's not the right title, but there is a board. They sit on the appropriate board, so there is that oversight at officer level, which feeds up to the bilaterals and then feeds up to the London Policing Board. And the London Policing Board is very clear, and I think the fact that it is held in public should give you confidence. You know what's happening, you can see what's happening, you can read the papers, and that shows you the processes and the oversight that's happening. And I have confidence that that will not only challenge but will support the Metropolitan Police going forward, because the people on the London Policing Board have a significant experience and expertise in change, in demand, in workforce planning and in change.
Commissioner.
I'm actually going to bring in Assembly Member Pidgeon, because I think we've been looking at this section for quite a long time, and I think we're ready to move to Assembly Member Pidgeon's questions.
Well, I'd like to ask the Commissioner something.
Very quickly.
Commissioner, do you feel like within your own team you have the expertise to continue to deliver it into the future as well? Because as the pressure of the Baroness Casey report goes away, do you still think it will be a priority for you, and how will you make sure workforce planning is a priority?
We're building it at the moment, so we've done a lot better this year than we would have done previously, but there's more to do. Fundamentally, it goes back to some of the workforce questions at the start. If you've removed most of your capability to do the boring things behind the scene that make a big organisation work, like your business planning, your finances, your strategic planning, all that organising where you're looking at demand, looking at the future, and you're working out what resources do we need, and you're feeding that into a sort of an intelligent budget process with choices with City Hall and Home Office. If you don't have that machinery, it takes some time to rebuild. So this year's process has been the first go at that. I think we've made a reasonable attempt at it, and next year it'll be better. So one of the legacies I need to leave is an organisation where those foundations just work. So whatever the challenges of the Met are, it can tack and move to meet them. So we're making a lot of progress, and I think the things I would highlight, for example, the deliberate choices in the plan we've got going forward on the budget. So over last year and this year, through these deliberate choices, we're putting 793 more people into public protection because the demands in that area, so rape, domestic violence, child abuse, etc., has in the last decade sort of tripled or quadrupled, depending which metric you look at. The resources have barely changed. So it's not surprising the service isn't what any of us would want it to be. The people in there care deeply and are stretched unreasonably. So we've done some planning, and so some of the investment this year in rape and serious sexual offence officers is calibrated to bring down from workloads per investigator from 30 cases each to 15 cases each, which is more in line with national benchmarks. So there's one example. I could also talk about what we want to put on volume crime or neighbourhood. So all of that we're starting to fit in. I can't say I've got the perfect process yet. We've got a sort of, a rough working version one of it, and it will get stronger over the next year.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you. Commissioner, can I just pick up on the issue of Baroness Casey talked about you doing this full sort of bottom-up budget review, and you touched on this earlier, saying you sort of done a bit of zero-based budgeting, which I have to say is music to my ears, and my former colleague on the MPA, Baroness D. Ducey, was obsessed by this, and the Met just wouldn't grasp it. Can you talk us a bit more around that, ensuring that your investment is aligned with priorities and demand rather than just historically how that's been done? And has this review been completed, or have you just done it in one particular area?
No, so I might be stretching things to call what we've done as a full zero base. So we have over the last few months sort of taken a rule across the whole organisation, trying to work out where there are opportunities, where are the choices. So opportunities to make real savings, or choices where everything actually we'd rather make a cut there because there's less risk there than there is over here operationally. Yeah. So we've done that at a high level, and so that's we've got 161 million of savings in this year's budget as a result of that, which is sort of about 4.5%, which is a good sort of first cut. A proper zero-based approach, having done this in sort of other leadership roles like in counter-terrorism before, you need to, I think it will take 2 or 3 years to work across the whole organisation, because you need to pick a function. So you pick forensics, or you pick volume crime investigation, and you need to dive into that in a lot of detail. You need to properly understand the processes, work out is it efficient, how's it working, how could it be more efficient, and also what are the demands and what would the right size be. So it's about efficiency and workloads, and that level of detail takes quite a lot of research and right expertise. So as part of our change programme, and part of the money that we're spending this year as a result of our savings and to the Mayor's investments, is to enable us to build a proper sustainable process where over the next 2 or 3 years we work through the whole of the Met slice by slice and do that really thoroughly, so that by the end of that you've given every piece of the organisation the efficiency sort of it can get to, and also got it the right size. And as part of that, one of the things we need to look at is sort of if it's savings or opportunities like automation. Some of our processes are very, very bureaucratic, and with modern technology you could streamline that so the people are doing less sort of mandrolic sort of functions, because the technology does that for them, and you're using your people to make sort of high quality decisions and doing the quality of work they would like to do rather than that boring work. So it's not going to happen overnight, but we are determined to do it. I need more investment in the Met to be the size and the talent it needs to be going forward, and some of what we've talked about this year is a good start, but I have a duty to make sure I'm making best use of what we've got, and I do recognise that.
So following from Baroness Casey's report, so you're looking at this systematically going through the Met over 2 to 3 years to get those savings out, modernise, transform it. Alongside that, we were told yesterday at Budget Committee, and the Mayor said to ask you today, because it was your bid, that you've got to bid into the Home Office of funding. Sounded to me it was around funding staff rather than officers or something, but is it also linked to this, needing the resource for you to get underneath this to ultimately make it a more efficient service?
It's linked to some of our sort of technology and change initiatives. It is linked to that, as well as the staff point. But obviously that's mid-conversations. I'm not going to talk about that in detail.
No, but can you give us any more flavour? What sort of thing you're asking for?
I've said as much as I need to, really. So sort of, we're in conversations with the Home Office, which has been very constructive, and I don't feel it's right to go into that detail at the moment.
Is there any timescale at all for that? Or?
Well, I'd anticipate it by the 1st of April anyway, so...
Okay, so watch this space. Yes. We might hear something along that, which would help with this. What's the size of the team that you have working through this sort of review of your finances, or what's the size of the team you envisage it being?
We're just building that team, partly sort of internal resources and partly external expertise. I haven't got a number to hand for you, though.
Okay. Will you be able to send us
I can
that?
let you know that. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, I'll leave that there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to bring in Assemblymember Devenish.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, both. PCSOs, Commissioner, how many of the Met's new PCSOs are on the street right now, please, and how is their impact being measured?
So we, as I say, we started the year 1,600 fewer PCSOs than we were a decade ago, and at the start of last year, the Mayor put in funding potentially to grow by 500. We're going to get to around, I can't remember the number exactly, 150-ish more this year, but we started 200 vacancies as well, so we'll have grown by over 300 this year, but the sort of growth above our establishment will be about 100, 150 or so, and then we're projecting to do the same next year. So they're going into our neighbourhood teams. Our sort of full new neighbourhood policing model will be launched over the summer, but the effect of them is to be measured through things like the sort of confidence of local communities in terms of the way we deal with antisocial behaviour and crime in their areas. And I guess we might come on to this at some point, but I think one of the things that has struck me that we've managed to achieve over this year is our sort of the trust and confidence type data in the Met has stabilised. It stopped falling, which is where it was over the last 4 years, and in some. And it's interesting when you benchmark it elsewhere, and this is the sort of stuff that neighbourhood officers make a big difference on. So if we look, for example, I'm just finding my note here, look at the confidence of local people in the policing of their area. So the percentage that say they're doing an excellent job, we are well above the national average and above the other big city forces. So it's stabilised, and it's stabilised compared to others in a better position. That's not to be complacent. It's fallen a long way. We now need to build it back up again, but that's positive, and it's through things like that, through things like PCSOs, making a difference in communities that will move those numbers.
And perhaps you could just write to me on the specifics of the PCSOs, what
I'll give you the precise numbers, yeah.
That would be really helpful. And has the funding for the additional 1,100 PCSOs now been identified, please?
So it's in our ambition. It's not in the current budget.
Do you know when it will be in the current budget?
It'll be part of our long-term workforce plan is just like I would like the 3,000 staff to put 3,000 more officers on the front line. I'd like 1,600 PCSOs to build our neighbourhoods sort of to the size that it needs to be. There's a sort of financial limitation, but there's also a recruiting limitation at the moment. So that's where we are. So every year in the budget cycle, based on what's possible recruiting-wise and what's available financially, we'll be looking at that.
And then moving on, what discussions have you had with MOPAC and the Mayor regarding the required funding for the new Met for London, please?
Crikey. thousands of conversations over the last 3 months. It's been a very long and interactive process. So I mean, so as you'd expect in the budget process, just to sort of talk about it at a high level, we've been doing proper budget planning. I mean, ideally, we're doing it in the summer, but we're building the capability, so it's been later than you would ideally like. We're doing proper budget planning in terms of this is where we are, here are the finances based on assumptions in terms of Mayor's grant and Home Office grant. This is the pressures it's going to leave in the system, which say was a bit over 200 million. Here's, regardless of the pressures, what we need to spend to start to reform the organisation, which was sort of nearly 200 million as well. So you get to sort of around 400 million. We're then looking at what can we do to try and balance that because of our responsibilities, and hence 160 million savings. And then we're having sort of iterative conversations with City Hall in terms of can they help beyond the council tax with sort of further investment to help us make more progress. And so we've gone through that iterative process, and we've got to the numbers that the Mayor and ourselves have published in the last few days.
And how much has the new Met for London cost to date, and what impact has the uncertainty of funding for the new Met for London had on delivery of the programme, do you think?
I can't produce a cost to date. There was investment last year and this year, which I don't have a sort of a ready reckoner. We have projected to sort of meet the challenges in terms of total workforce and improving the quality to London, that over 3 to 4 years that we probably need to invest about 900 million in the policing of London, and we've started that journey over the last couple of years. And we can lay all that out again after this, if that's helpful.
Thank you. And can I just go back to the point that was briefly touched on earlier in terms of your, I won't say excuse, your rationale that the reason recruitment is being a problem is because of the London job market and because of pay, etc. I don't disagree with any of that, but the reality is you are 1,000 officers down on where you should be, correct? And
by the end of this financial year, it'll be 1,400 roughly.
Yeah, and do you think it's going to get worse than that? I mean, I've heard some figures up to 2,000. Is that true?
It'll go beyond that over the next year, probably.
And so, is there a plan? Because I appreciate all the excuses and the reasons, and
I think that's very loaded to use the word excuse. We're having a frank conversation. So, I'm not sure that helps the debate.
Okay, so rationale. I'll change my words, Commissioner. Have you got a plan to make up that very substantial shortfall in officers' numbers?
So we are constantly doing everything we possibly can do to change that. So as part of the national drive for police officer recruitment, the Home Office have got a central team. We've been taking everything we can do from them. Is there anything in our processes for recruitment that can be improved from best practice from around the country? So making sure those are as good as they can be, and we've taken on all of those issues. We've also been looking again at a sort of different advertising campaign and different ways of reaching out, and we're working on that at the moment, and that will be launching in the next 2 or 3 months, and I'm sort of excited by what I've seen so far on there. So we're doing everything we can do in terms of the best practice in recruiting, but if you were in most sectors, one of the things you would look at is our pay and reward package the right package. That's not in my gift, hence my point earlier about submissions to national pay negotiating. And also, of course, you do benchmark. You think, actually, is this just about us, or is it a wider problem? And hence the reason we've been looking at sort of public sector employability and sort of recruitment issues across London, and it's pretty widespread across the whole of the public sector, which tells me it's a pattern. We've also thought hard about the sort of reputation and confidence issues, and it's one of the things that's reassuring in our numbers is that the applications from women and from black, Asian and other minority ethnic applicants has held up well. So there's a range of things which keeps taking me back to this is at its core about a London employability issue, but we're not shying away from can we tweak our processes, can we do advertising differently, but I think it's going to take a big movement that others have got the levers for if we're going to turn it in the other direction. But falling back at the rate we're falling, what that means for the policing in London is really profound and concerning. I don't shrink away from that, and I'm pulling every lever I have in my gift and asking others to pull the levers they have in their gift.
So you're telling me you're going to be basically an entire BCU down in staffing. do you think you need further outside help? Because yes, I accept all the points you've made, but do you think you need to go back to the Home Office or the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor? There's got to be other things that we can do, because we can't just say it's going to go down, the whole BCU is disappearing.
So, as I've said, in terms of recruiting, I think the employability issues for the public sector in London are really concerning, and those levers do not sit in my gift, but we're making a very strong case for how those can be fixed through the national pay mechanisms. Secondly, in terms of mitigating the effect of this on the people of London, in terms of our workforce planning and the earlier conversation, the point about the investment in police staff that takes officers that we already have but are doing back office jobs onto the front line, we can mitigate the effects for London in the shorter term by freeing those people up. So that's why that's absolutely critical. It's not for me, it's not a nice to have, it's a critical step to get every possible officer we could do on the front line serving London. And the way to do that in the short term is with that investment in staff to take on those roles.
I'll leave it there, Chair, but it'd be good if the Commissioner could write to us with any more detail on that, because I think it is the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems, clearly.
It's critical. Let me lay out the timeline and the numbers and the detail. I think we'll do that for you.
Thank you.
That would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Assembly Member Hall, you wanted to come in briefly.
This is very,
for a
very
point
quick.
Of clarification.
Just how many warranted officers, approximately, are there in the Metropolitan Police at the moment?
So let me flip to my. So we are going to fit. So our police uplift programme sort of target headcount number, and this is based on FTE, so full-time equivalent. So not on sort of total headcount, full-time equivalent. The number is 35,415. So that's what the Home Office is prepared to fund. Where we anticipate being at the end of March is around 34,000, i.e. around 1,400 light, as I said. We anticipate our projection for the next year, based on current application levels, recruiting levels, etc., unless we can make a sharp movement in that, is for that to drop by approximately another 1,250. So we would expect to be at 32,750 roughly at the end of March 2025. Right. Now, that is deeply concerning to me, as I know it is to you, and so it's good that we've spent this time on this subject, which is why I'm pulling every lever I can, and why I desperately need the support and investment to free up officers from jobs that they shouldn't be doing, and also, and that's a sort of short-term mitigation, whilst we hopefully through this year's pay structure, which that reports in the summer and that could start to have effect from the autumn, start to change the employability prospects for police officers joining the Met in London.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all get that. Out of those 32,750, are you also telling me out of that, 3,000 of those are not actually doing frontline jobs?
So it's more than that. But it's 3,000 we want to free up in that period of time that we think that's a realistic target.
Okay, how many warranted officers are doing staff jobs?
More than 3,000.
Approximately how many more?
I'm not going to make a note. It's more than 3,000.
Okay. I mean, are we talking 1,000 more than that, or are we talking in the hundreds? You don't know?
I'm not going to make it. We have the data. It's not one number I've committed to my brain, because we've looked at what we can achieve over the next 3 years, and we think freeing up 3,000 is the ambition.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you'll write to us, but that takes us way under 30,000 officers, because people keep saying to me, because I keep saying, well, we should have 34,500 officers, because that's the figures we've had over the time, and the constant response is, well, where are they? Which doesn't help any of us. And I appreciate your problems, I completely do.
And
this is really
the other factor that's relevant to this is, I think it's worth reflecting on the separate sort of funding streams to the Met, because the sort of counter-terrorism and protective security funding, which is about 700 million of our 4.2 billion budget in the Met, is obviously ring-fenced to those functions as part of national security spending from government, and I have no problem at all with that ring-fencing. but that has grown over the years. So the number of the officers that are in that part of the Met has grown, has doubled in the last 10 years, roughly, and I think there are about 6,000 officers roughly in that area now. So those are doing national work, not policing London. So the policing of London function is sort of maybe 6,000 smaller than those numbers.
Okay, so they're included within those numbers?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'm sure we'll come back to this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Desai, and we're moving on to look at governance, scrutiny and accountability. So, Chapter 8 of Casey.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Good morning. If I can ask you both a couple of questions about the relationship between the Met and MOPAC. So, Baroness Casey described this relationship as dysfunctional. As far as the Met was concerned, it was defensive and had a tendency towards obfuscation. And as for MOPAC, she said it lacked a systematic approach to supporting and challenging the delivery of agreed aims, objectives, or outcomes. So how have you both worked together over the past 18 months to address these concerns? With what results? And where are we today? Do you want to start off, Sophie?
I feel like I'm in marriage counselling.
You're without a couch.
Hopefully no tissues. I mean, the picture that I completely recognise the picture that Baroness Casey painted in her report. I obviously gave evidence to Baroness Casey as well, and there are examples of where, in the report itself, of where we had previously found real difficulties with the Met and the leadership of the Met. And a case in point was the body-worn video research that we wanted to do, which is now sorted. So that's an example of the difference and the change in the leadership and the style of the leadership. It takes time to change culture, it does take time. But overall, it is night and day the difference between the relationship between MOPAC and the Met in terms of day-to-day working at officer level, but also working at myself with the Commissioner and his senior leadership team. You can see that, and it's not just warm words. You can see that in the way that the new Met for London plan was developed, for example. Really close collaborative working on that through the new Met for London plan. We've worked with the Met on a child first approach, on work around command and control, on the Connect programme, and around right care, right person. All those things have been significant differences into the way that we've worked. And one of the issues that has been a problem before is on data sharing. Whilst there's still work to be done on that, we have made significant progress on that. We've got access to a tool called Met Insights, which is allowing us much more access to crime data without having to request it from the Met. So that's direct access. And for example, we're working on a drug problem profile with the Met at the moment, and that showed how useful that access can be. So in terms of the picture that's painted in the Casey report, that is no longer the case. You can see the strategy, and we have also, as I've discussed before, we have also thought about how do we make our oversight more strategic. And one of the ways you make your oversight more strategic is not having to do the sort of ground level battles to get the data, to get the information, and to have that relationship right, which means that you can lift yourself up and be more strategic, which means you can make sure that, for example, the London Policing Board has a worked through work plan. It has a worked through performance indicators, which Lord Bailey was asking me about, work through performance indicators that are joint, have been agreed and signed off both by the Met and MOPAC. So there is a sort of shared version of where you are trying to get to.
Commissioner.
Thank you. Sorry, the marriage guidance thing is still stuck with me. So I think we're making sort of good steps towards a sort of more collaborative relationship. The law creates sort of two separate organisations with different responsibilities that are supposed to work very, very closely together, and the scale of the challenges in terms of really transforming and changing the way a police service is sort of resourced, organised, run, managed, sort of cuts across both of our responsibilities, and so that joint working is really really important, and I'm absolutely committed to that and the transparency. It's a sort of, I think, quite a big change, and there's a lot to do a lot to do there, and some of the issues we're discussing are things like on sort of performance match. So Sophie talked about data and how we making progress on that, and there's more to do, and issues like performance management where we've got separate teams doing sort of performance data, and sort of we're looking at how we might have that sort of more jointly together, so we have a sort of shared insight and reporting as far as possible that enables us to be having the right conversations rather than looking at two sets of graphs that on the same data say different things, which isn't ideal. So we're working towards that, and of course then we've got changes built around things like the London Policing Board, which have added into other governance frameworks as well, which have added sort of further scrutiny and different expertise to the table.
So, coming back to you, Deputy Mayor, if asked now, and to some extent you already answered this question, but I'll still put it to you. I mean, how do you think that officers in MOPAC would describe the relationship between the two organisations?
I think what they would say is that it has improved, but there's still work in progress in terms of making sure on a day-to-day level that access is as smooth as possible. But in terms of the strategic work that we're doing, there's been significant improvement, and I touched on some of the examples of that where we have made those had that joint collaborative working. There's still some work. It takes time to change a culture, and the culture of the Met that Baroness Casey outlines is not just around all the issues around personnel and misconduct and disproportionality and values and principles, and that does, it is also about opening up and being more transparent and accountable. That does take time, and I think I would hope that officers in MOPAC would be able to say that they can see progress, and that they can see a path to getting to the point that it really needs to be at.
Thank you. And Commissioner, the other way around, how would you say that your officers would describe their relationship with MOPAC now? Anything more that needs to be done?
So we've been working together for just over a year, so it's made progress, but we'd say the same. I think our people would say we've made progress in some respects, but there's more to do, because as I've just talked about, for example, the planning and budget process this year, next year needs to be smoother, and I think sort of some of that definitely sits on us, but it's probably a joint responsibility as well. So it's work in progress to be really reshaping the Met, and I think the scale of what we need to do in terms of putting the resources where Londoners need them, meeting some of the massive strategic challenges such as the ones pulled out by the questions earlier about recruiting and workforce balance, that requires to get to a very different way that the Met serves London requires a lot of heavy lifting together, and we've sort of had our first year at sort of building that new approach, and it's going to take time to get it as good as it needs to be, but it's making progress.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it.
Thank you. And I will now bring in Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely. I want to talk about learning and challenge. And Commissioner, since Baroness Casey's review, can you talk us through how the Met has improved, or indeed has it improved, how it embeds learning and makes the changes needed?
So a key theme for me on this has been about how we bring in sort of outside voices and different perspectives into the Met, and I'll give you a few examples of that. So we've strengthened our non-executive directors on the sort of management board with a range of different skills. We're more routinely using sort of outside insight in our work. So, for example, our operationonics work in professional standards, looking at sort of sexual allegations against officers over the last 10 years. We've had a lot of external scrutiny and involvement in decision making at key points in that process. We've sort of also our sort of plan in terms of the new Met for London plan. I don't think we've ever consulted as much on anything at all. Sort of, we produced a sort of rough first stab in January last year, which is called the turnaround plan. That was published with a view to that we want everyone's views on that. There were an enormous amount of events and consultation on that, and we also made clear, and we're pending Louise Casey's report. That then all got sort of crushed in the hopper and produced the new Met for London plan in the summer, and we've been out and sort of we did events in all 32 boroughs in 8 weeks over the summer about how do we go forward with this, and there have been follow-on events locally run by BCU commanders, and we'll be continuing that cycle. We've sort of reset our relationship with London councils. I'm meeting all the leaders twice a year. I was with them a couple of weeks ago, reflecting on how things are working locally, and AC Louisa Rolfe and her team are meeting them more regularly, and I was really encouraged by what I heard from them, that they felt they were seeing a difference in terms of, as we shift the balance from everything driven from Scotland Yard to seeing the local balance feeling different from their perspective, which I think was really good. Not finished, but work in progress and getting there. And there's some interesting things going on across the Met. Sort of Chief Superintendent Simon Crick on his BCU doing some work in Waltham Forest on a citizens' assembly with the local authority as an example. And all of our neighbourhood superintendents have sort of established new mechanisms locally. So trying to be more outward reaching and listening. And it's not an accident that in the 5 operating principles we've set in the new Met for London plan, the first one is about putting communities first, the third one's about inclusivity, and the fourth one is about being collaborative. So those are, and we're in the process of hardwiring that into appraisals and how we operate.
Great, but it's great that you talked about the community engagement stuff, that's really great, but you talked about bringing in external experts, which I had pushed you to many times in the Mayor, and you've got these new non-execs. Give me a practical example of a challenge at the board from one of those non-execs or an alternative view, and what you've done that's changed as a result.
So, for example, we're building a complex and challenging change programme. 2 of the non-execs have got a lot of experience of doing that in different sectors, and they've challenged us on sort of, the quality of papers coming for board, how we're managing and leading it, how the board works together on it. So we've had some sort of substantive conversations.
Governance kind of challenges.
So on that, but likewise, we've got 2 of the NEDs are looking at our developing programme on culture change, and they're involved in meetings at different tiers in the organisation and challenging what's in that and helping us develop our thinking on that. So it's ranging from subject matter. One of the other NEDs has got a lot of technology, an amazing technology experience, and is being challenging and helping us with our Connect programme, for example, and some of our wider technology programmes to generate innovation, like the automation I mentioned earlier. So I didn't want NEDs just as governance tick boxing. I wanted them to bring skill sets where they could dive into particular important strands, and those are some examples.
That's what I was trying to get at there. Okay, but let's talk about embedding learning. Let's talk about a specific area, and you can probably guess what I'm going to talk about: child protection. So let's look at that area. The Met seems to have struggled to embed any learning in that area and make the required changes. We've had numerous reports since 2016, as I regularly talk about with the Deputy Mayor. In the autumn, as I'd raised with you at plenary, we had 2 accelerated causes of concern, and then the recent, yet again, damning is the only word, once again, report come out on how the Met handles child protection. So what are you doing to embed learning to turn around this area, which is clearly failing young Londoners?
Thank you. So I think I wouldn't necessarily come at it from the word learning. I think you actually have to look at what will make the change that's needed to make and make it stick. And I made the point earlier about resources. Yeah. If sort of rape, domestic violence, child abuse, all those public protection areas, if the caseloads go sort of triples or quadruples in a decade and you barely change the resources, then the consequences for victims are they're going to see a very stretched service, which is going to struggle to deliver for them. So we're looking at the resourcing of that. We're looking at sort of particular ways it's organised. The way we assess risk of missing young people, we're looking at whether a more central model might help with a more standardised approach. And so there's the sort of how you manage the function and properly taking on the learning, and not just issuing a new policy and pretending that will stick if the resources or training and things aren't there. So doing it sort of much more systematically. The second part of that, I think, balances with the strategic function of the organisation in terms of, do you have proper change capability, and do you have a way of tracking actions and managing that's sustainable and resilient? Because frankly we haven't, and that's part of that fixing the foundations we spoke about earlier. So it's about basic good governance and how a big organisation, in our case policing, whether you identify them yourself or somebody else does, identify things that need to change and improve, actually looking properly hard at why isn't it working, what are the causal factors, how do we change that, how do we make it stick, and how do we follow through. It's proper governance and change management. And I mean, for example, I have seen we have new policies and learning logs that go around organisations, but those are never going to make the difference you need if you haven't got training, skills, resources and things right.
That's right, so it's far more fundamental,
Exactly.
rather than, OK, here's the quick action plan, we tick it off, we show we've done that, move on to the next thing, and then you get another report you've got to react to.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of, you can see the effect of sort of determined change. So as we've started strengthening public protection, and there's a lot to do on child protection, I don't dispute that. But our sort of our work on rape has improved substantially from being sort of amongst the bottom in the country for solving those cases to being the top, similar for child abuse investigation. So we're starting to sort of systematically change the child protection side. We've got to do more, and I completely accept that, and we've got a plan that's already making progress.
Yeah, and you said earlier 793 extra officers into that area. Do they work across...
We're part way through. We're not all the way through. That's
right.
From this year, sort of 23-24 investment, which is we've managed to get sort of around half the officers in sort of from memory, and then we're going to try and put more in next year as well. And
how many of those are around child protection, or do they cover different areas?
I can't remember this, but they cover different areas, but some are.
You could write to us
Yes.
about perhaps. You talked about training, and we constantly talk about training here, but when there's clearly a victim blaming attitude, and we've seen that in report after report, a really negative view of young people, how and what are you doing to do that training differently? Because clearly it hasn't worked over the years. You've tried different training models. What's different in that area that's going to make the change?
So we're still looking at how we're going to deliver that
Right.
training and have that effect. So I haven't got an answer for you now, but we'll be up to update in due course.
Okay. I've only got a few weeks to be updated, so
That's
you're going to
all right.
have to come back quite quickly on that. Let's look at this. In December, another HMIC FRS report, Care Quality Commission and HM Inspectorate of Probation did a targeted inspection of a multi-agency response to serious youth violence in Merton. And in that report, it said, despite individual efforts of committed police officers, the absence of a child-centred policing strategy in London is contributing to a disjointed and inconsistent service to children affected by serious youth violence, and so on. Where are we with that child-centred approach? Where are you with your strategy to absolutely make sure that you're getting this right first time?
So the team is still working on the strategy. The Deputy Mayor referenced it earlier. It's a very difficult balance for policing compared to other safeguarding agencies, because we have two balancing duties. We are the law says that children over the age of 10 have criminal responsibility, and the law creates safeguarding duties in terms of it sort of being sort of child-centred. We have to operate in both of those areas. We're dealing with children who are sort of taking machetes to each other on one hand, and children who are vulnerable on the other hand. And finding the right balance on that is important. Partners in this space are much more focused on the diversion and the support, which is completely proper, but we have to find that right balance, and we're still working on that.
And what's the timescale for that? Because that's what, I mean, that was something that was in your new Met for London as well, this new child-centred approach.
It's the date is in the future. There's so many dates in that. I can't remember all the dates. It's in that plan.
I'm not sure there is a date. I haven't seen one. I think I've been asking mayors questions on it. I don't think
I'll come back to you with one.
I don't think there is. Because I think unless you get that, I mean, I don't know if you've got any further comments on that inspection into Merton, whether you've got any other thoughts or comments on it.
I mean, I think it was quite wide-ranging. I think it was, what I recall, it was sort of, frankly, more positive about the policing role in the partnership than some of the other partners. I think that was quite a wide-ranging inspection.
I thought it had been quite positive about everyone else other than the police, actually, but we'll see. But I think there is, that shows that getting this approach right, and that's part of your fundamentals, is the only way you're going to transform this area.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Duval.
Look, there's been a number of positive steps forward, but equally in terms of child protection and some of the issues, and I think just that last encounter just quoted that there is a vast gap between the reality of the service and actually when it comes to be inspected, what's really going on. Do you not think that you say we're halfway through the plans around child protection, but do you not think the nature of it requires probably a bit more of not crisis management, but a bit more of the accelerators to get us to where we want to be in terms of this public protection issue, remembering that actually our delays, bureaucratic delays or inaction, creates more problems for the victim. This in terms of where we are. And also in terms of, and your plans sound all plausible, feasible, on the right direction of travel, but actually it's been going on for too long. The inconsistency, if I turn up at 8, it's the same issues what we've had before, and you rightly pointed to where we haven't got it completely right, but we're on the right track about tackling violence against women and sexual crimes. But on children, I don't think we have really. We've started the journey, but actually the outcome isn't good enough. It can't be good enough. You can't be satisfied as a professional. I can't be satisfied as an oversight, and nor can, and we know the efforts that MOPAC and the Deputy Mayor has made at different times before you came on to, taking responsibility on this. So do we not need, is it now not time to say, actually, we've got these plans, but we really need to drive it much deeper, we need to accelerate it, we need a different approach, and we need the emphasis there, because actually we're not there, and we're failing young people in London. We're failing them. That's the reality of all these reports over the years, and when we've gone back and we think we've solved it, we haven't quite solved it. And I don't say that we haven't got people working hard in these areas, and there probably are in different outposts, but there's something that's not quite right, and our more of the same isn't going to have the right impact here.
So a sense of urgency is absolutely what we have in the team. We've already changed our risk assessment process, which is one of the criticisms, because this was all about the risk of child exploitation for sexual or criminal purposes, this inspection. So it was less about child abuse investigations. It was more on that child exploitation theme. A key part. A key part of lost my train of thought there for a moment. A key part of the issue was about risk assessment. We've changed our risk assessment process. That's creating other challenges. On one BCU, the number of missing children graded high risk has gone up by 50% overnight. So that's a massive surge in workload. So there is an urgency in terms of improving the way we do things, and there's moves I already see happening. It goes to that point about an organisation that's trying to improve on multiple fronts. So we've had conversations about improving rates, improving child abuse investigations, putting more resources into neighbourhoods, putting more resources into professional standards and dealing with the challenges there, in an organisation that actually its frontline sort of policing capability is shrinking. That is a really painful balance. So there's not a fatalism or defeatism here at all. We're determined to succeed, and we're trying to move forward very quickly on multiple fronts. I'm just not going to sit here and pretend that it's straightforward. I think you can be very ambitious and very determined in a complex environment where you can't move as fast as in an ideal world, if this is the only thing we were trying to move the dial on in the Met, you could move much quicker. But when you try and move it on multiple fronts, that's the challenge we face. And when you start to move the dial and your workload goes up by 50%, that is a big challenge.
But what I'm arguing is I understand all those issues that you've said to me, and I don't think I'm asking the impossible, but I'm asking for like a slightly different approach to where you pick up on, and let's go to child protection issues, where you watch those case levels either going high, how do we support those people on the ground rather than watch those case levels go high and be left unattended, undealt with, even though you've got a new risk model of where in the postcode lottery about leadership that actually we got some fantastic leadership and we got some pedestrian leadership that isn't actually fit for doing what we need to do. So what I need to know is that supervision there? Is the intervention there to move into those areas where you're helping, supporting, or going into areas and giving some extra resources, even for a short while, because you recognise something is going quite wrong? What we can't have, and that's why I say more of the same, is letting things drift. Of letting things drift and letting the bureaucracy manage it with a risk assessment issue, because the nature of these crimes and the consistency in terms of what we need to offer in terms of these victims of these crimes needs to be much higher. No one, and do you think there is an issue about young people, and not just young people, but issues around child protection, the voice for those victims? There is the advocacy isn't always there. And in some ways, you've got a job to do, and I think you eloquently outlined the balance. But what I'm asking for is a different type of intervention, and maybe it's there, and maybe when you come back to the committee, you can highlight where you think that is there, when you think that standards fall below certain areas, and maybe indicate to us when you think you have performed. I don't need the geographical details, but we'd like to hear about those instances to give us some reassurance that that is taking place within the system that you've outlined.
So there's some extraordinary work going on day in and day out. So one example would be some of the technology we've been using to focus on arresting the men of violence behind the drugs lines. We've flipped that, and we've been using it to spot and identify and get hold of in a constructive way the young people who've been coerced, threatened into running drugs for them. So we've been using that technology to identify those missing children, those children at risk, and getting hold of them and sort of getting them into sort of the right support from sort of youth services and others, as an example. We have put a VAS of uplifting public protection, we were talking about it earlier. Some of that were extra resources going into the child exploitation area. I just can't recall the exact number off the top of my head. And so we've already testing different ways of doing the risk assessment and trying to improve the focus in terms of identifying the most vulnerable children and the way we go after them. So there's an awful lot going on there to move the dial as quickly as we possibly can do. And perhaps at one of your future scrutiny meetings, maybe with the commander in that area, Kevin Southworth, I know he's been a couple of times this year. I'm sure there'll be a case to dive into that and talk through some of the detail in the numbers and how it's moving in the right direction. And in terms of training, one of my commitments is about sort of better leadership training. We're training all of our frontline leaders this year, so that's a week's training for 7,000 sergeants and frontline supervisors on a range of issues, and public protection issues like domestic violence and this are part of that training. So there's an awful lot in the plan that's trying to move the dial on these issues.
Thank you, and I think you're hearing loud and clear that this committee feels very strongly about protection of young people, I mean, I think the decrease in the use of strip search as a tactic in terms of policing young children is something that we've raised with you, and we raised with you the problem of it, and we've welcomed the decrease in that. But there are still issues around the presence of appropriate adults, disproportionality in policing of young people, and also the use of force that sometimes leads to hospitalisation, which we learned about from Red Thread. So I think these are these are issues that this committee, all of the committee, cares about, and I think we will certainly take that up. Hopefully, we can all suggest to the next chair of this committee for next year that we can follow through on the protection of young people.
So, if I can come back, just Chair, please, on that very, very briefly. So, the things you said there are true, but present just one side of the issue. So I think that the challenge is when you've got several hundred children a year in London are stabbed, usually by other children, when you've got sort of many hundreds of children involved in drug supply, there will be occasions where more than a cursory search is required. There will be occasions where use of force is required. Now, none of us want to be in a situation where police officers have to do that, but the reality is that they do, and they need our support, that will be confident in supporting them using their powers, as much as we have expectations that they will think about the issues like, is it possible to get an appropriate adult present for a search, etc. So, which is happening the vast majority of the time now. So I think we need to support people dealing with difficult issues, and that's why I made the point about, I think, a sort of child-first strategy in policing is a very hard balance to find, because we've got to recognise both that duty to enforce the law to protect people, both the young person and others, from harm, and the fact the law says children over the age of 10 are criminally responsible, balanced with the vulnerability and the complexity of issues often behind children in those situations. I think that's the tension, and that's what we're wrestling with. And I think it's helpful if when the committee recognises those two sides of the challenge that we face.
Yep, absolutely. We are now taking a 5-minute comfort break, so we will be back at 11:37.
Approximately.
Sorry. Welcome back to the Police and Crime Committee. Can I just double check that the broadcast is running, because I banged the gavel? Yes? All good? Excellent, thank you very much. So over to Assembly Member Hall for questions on the London Policing Board.
Okay, thank you. My first question has actually been answered, but can I ask you, Commissioner, do you think that the Mayor was right to scrap the Crime Reduction Board?
I think the creation of the London Policing Board, it was worth looking at wider governance, and the London Policing Board, frankly, for us is it's a lot more governance and oversight, and it's public, and balancing that off with does that make other boards largely redundant, I think was a good conversation to have, and I have no objections to it going at all.
When you've got the other one, okay, I hear what you say there. What resource implications has the London Police Board placed on the Met, and how does this differ from the level of resource previous MOPAC oversight demanded of the Met?
It's quite a substantial increase in a workload for senior leaders and senior staff. So we're going to be having 10 public meetings a year, 4 main committees and 6 subcommittees, one that will meet 4 times a year, one that will meet twice a year publicly. That they each require sort of anything between 1 and 3 members of my senior team to attend, to do them justice, and they normally have 2 or 3 papers each, which take substantial sort of preparation to put a sort of paper on a complex set of issues in the public domain. So I think over 2024, for example, we're anticipating maybe 30 separate items going to the London Policing Board over those meetings, which will have hundreds of hours of preparation. I mean, clearly, Baroness Casey said that sort of she didn't feel the oversight of policing in London was working properly, and she recommended the creation of the board, which it's not for me to sort of comment on the right way to be overseen. So that was the recommendation, and we're doing everything we can to work with it. But I'm also keen that my leadership team have time to actually make the changes necessary in the Met, as well as being scrutinised on delivering them, and hence issues like sort of the London Policing Board and the attendance, the London Crime Reduction Board going, and the conversations we're having about attendance here, and which I'm sure will resolve once we get past the election. I think all of those issues are being rebalanced because we've got this new big formal governance structure in the middle, and of course legally it's the Mayor and MOPAC who hold me to account, and under the Police Crime and Social Responsibility Act of 2012, and I need to work within those structures.
Yeah, I know. The Mayor can put in the London Police Board, and the Mayor could take out the London Police Board. That's for sure. Hundreds of hours, you say? Hundreds of hours?
In terms of preparing the work, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And are you measuring the resource and implications of that as to what else you can't do, or are you putting a financial costing on that to present to the Mayor on what it's costing?
We're not doing that. I mean, part of I think the key issue that we're working on to make this as constructive and as undisruptive as possible is we have a sort of plan in terms of all the change in the work we're doing. The more that the London Policing Board forward agenda is choreographed alongside that, so you can repurpose work you're already doing, the less of an extra demand it is. And I think that's the key to, as we bed down between us how it operates, we can make it, we can reduce the disruption as far as possible.
Yeah, I think many of us feel that we would rather top-level police officers were actually doing what they are supposed to be doing. And there are many of us here that feel, and this isn't your fault at all, but many of us do feel that we've been democratically elected to do this job. And then to hear that hundreds of hours are going to duplicate some of the stuff we're doing does seem... I'm sure the public would regard that as pretty ridiculous. But
can I just so I feel uncomfortable with some of this conversation in the sense of I'm the one who's held to account. So
we all appreciate that.
And so I think a lot of the conversation I don't mind being sat here, but sort of it's not for me to answer. I just need to do my job.
Question. It was a statement. It wasn't a question. It's what I do. The Mayor never likes it when I make a statement, but there we go. So, Commissioner Baroness Casey has said that the Met needs to be transparent to Londoners for its actions to earn their trust, confidence and respect. So 6 months on from its first meeting, how has the London Policing Board helped increase the trust, confidence and respect of Londoners in the Met? What evidence do you have to support it? If it's easier for the Deputy Mayor to answer, then that's fine.
You're asking me to say how good's the body that oversees me, which I don't think is. I don't think that's quite the right question. So I think I should pass it across to the Deputy Mayor.
I'm quite happy with that.
Thanks a lot. No, I appreciate that. I mean, just going back to your previous questions about the London Policing Board and whether it's an unnecessary burden, I would just politely remind you that when Baroness Casey published her report, I believe that everyone around this table accepted the recommendations, and one of the key recommendations for MOPAC and City Hall was to set up the London Policing Board. And we are working with the Commissioner and his team, as he said, to ensure that the workload there isn't a burden, to try to fit in so that it doesn't duplicate and it is added value and the challenge and scrutiny. But we must also accept that one of the things in Baroness Casey's report was that the scrutiny and oversight did need to improve, it did need to increase, and the London Policing Board is part of that. Now, if you can't be consistently questioning what did MOPAC do, did you know this, when we set up the processes and the structures to be more robust and to make sure that we've brought in outside expertise, you're now that is our response to the Casey report. I've been asked many times at this committee, quite rightly, what is your response? This is our significant part of the response. I don't think it does duplicate the work here. I think we're very careful to make sure that we don't do that duplication. The London Policing Board, as you've getting onto your question, has been up and running for about 6 months. It's had 2 proper London Policing Board meetings. I think it is early days in order to be able to assess the impact of the London Policing Board in relation to trust and confidence and in relation to the work that it is doing. However, I think that with the experience and expertise that are around that table, the challenge as well as the support and the added value will become very apparent, because it is part of, we have brought people in and appointed people who have expertise in change, have expertise in finance, have expertise in transformation, and I do believe that part of the work that it's doing, which is not just about the committee meetings, but is also about working alongside the Met and being with the Met and providing that expertise, will prove its worth.
Okay, so 6 months, there's no way of telling. What if it stays in place, what sort of date can you say we can by this time show you just how much difference it's made?
So as we have agreed the indicators that the London Policing Board will be holding the Metropolitan Police to account on, and those are the indicators that I think we should all be looking at about whether they move and what difference there has been in that around trust and confidence, around and around culture as well as performance. So those are the indicators that we should be held to account for in the London Policing Board. So going forward, that is what you should be looking for.
When?
Well, you can see, I mean, Baroness Casey in her report said that within 2 years there should be another review into the Met to see if progress had been made. She was clear in the report that it would not be that everything would be, everything would be solved. It would still be a journey. So I would hope that in 2 years' time, not 2 years' time, it would be a year from basically Baroness Casey's almost a year out anyway. In a year's time, that review would be able to show that not only has, in relation to your previous questions, not only has the strategic oversight of MOPAC and the ability to drive change improved, but the relationship between the Metropolitan Police and the MOPAC has improved, but also that the setting up of the London Policing Board has made a change.
So another year. Okay. And how is the London Policing Board working with and communicating to Londoners to demonstrate the progress the Met is making towards delivering more trust, less crime, high standards?
So the London Policing Board itself, as we all know, sits in public, and I think that's an important part of the work that it does to improve transparency and accountability, that is all open and the papers are all published. It's an important part of just communicating that and around transparency and accountability. We are working at the moment as to what other forms of communication and engagement we need to do around the London Policing Board to promote and to show the difference it can make, and also to bring in the voices of Londoners into the work that it's doing.
And when do you think you'll have done that?
Well, that's a piece of work that we're doing at the moment. We're obviously going into the pre-election period on March the 18th. So I would think that would be, it's ongoing. I don't have a date that we will have the finished plan, but we are always trying to communicate the work of the London Policing Board every time it meets, as well as the publication. It's sitting in public.
So no date on either. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Duval.
Look, I welcome the London Policing Board, but let's be very clear. It's an advisory board, and with the Police and Crime Commissioner, you can confuse issues, and we shouldn't be hiding the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner in terms of oversight of the Metropolitan Police Service, and that the public, we need to be clear with the public about that. Can I just say, look, the Casey Review set up a completely different body, or wanted to set up a completely different body than the advisory group. I thought actually it was very ambitious and wise of the Mayor to actually extend the remit of the advisory group beyond what Casey said, but immediately to deal with the various crises within the MPS. The test for me will be to see how we get on with some of the issues that were identified by Casey and on the HMI reports, because we shouldn't lose focus on those, albeit there are other issues where the Mayor and Deputy Mayor can be helped and supported in some of those wider issues. Now, Commissioner, can I just go back? I don't understand. So, in terms, and I thought the Deputy Mayor outlined it very clearly, what the support group should do. The advisory group's role in terms of supporting the police and supporting the Mayor in dealing with the issues of the day. But the Crime Reduction Board was a different discussion. Are you telling me that you believe that you can have that same discussion from the Crime Reduction Board, the London Crime Reduction Board, in the Police Advisory Group? Do you really believe that? I'm going to ask the Deputy Mayor because he wants to come in, but I'm going to ask you first. As a professional, in terms of partnership bodies and the conversations that took place at the Crime Reduction Board, you believe that can move to the Advisory Board? Given the people that were sitting around the table at the Crime Reduction Board.
I think I think it's more for the Deputy Mayor than for me, but I think we still have other boards like the Criminal Justice Board, for example. So it's not. If you add something new into a landscape, it makes sense to sort of check, actually, does the landscape need to change? And given there are other boards where those people get together at a London level, and of course there's the crime disorder partnership boards and things at a local level as well across the boroughs across London. I'm not saying it didn't do anything useful, but I'm just simply saying as you get a new player in this sort of governance sort of landscape, actually it makes sense to reset, and it makes sense to me, but it's more a decision for Sophie and the Mayor.
No, can I just come back? So before we move on and come to the Deputy Mayor, in the governance issues, which I understand, but the Crime Reduction Board was about professionals in terms of sharing issues, coming together on joint projects, talking through issues in terms of tackling crime and the issues of the day in London. How can the Advisory Board be a replacement for that from your point of view, from a policing perspective, working with your partners in tackling crime? I don't understand. Tell me, have I got it wrong about what the Crime Reduction Board was? Because it's a completely different set of people. The people sitting around the Crime Reduction Board are not the same people sitting around helping you on change management. They weren't doing change management. They were talking about issues of the day. So explain to me, please.
As does the Criminal Justice Board with similar people. And the Criminal Justice Board has a lot of the London partners, the key London partners are there.
So it's moved to that.
So that is covered. So there was a lot of overlap with that, and also you've still got the local partnerships at sort of Crime Reduction Board at a Crime Disorder Partnership Board level.
Can I just come in here? I think the role of the London Crime Reduction Board, when I took over all those years ago, was very unclear. And what the London Crime Reduction Board developed into was partly holding the Metropolitan Police to account, actually, which wasn't its role. And it did do a lot of, I'd say half the agenda was always the Deputy Commissioner coming along and answering questions from London leaders of boroughs, and also in terms of, and answering, there was definitely a role that the London Crime Reduction Board was undertaking, which wasn't really its role, which was holding to account. Now that part has gone to the London Policing Board. The other elements was absolutely, as you talk about the partnership being there and talking about the key issues, not necessarily the topical issues of the time, but the key issues, such as offending, such as victims, how are victims being supported right across the criminal justice system. Now, those elements of the work of the London Crime Reduction Board have moved to the are part of the London Criminal Justice Board. I have taken over chair of that board, and we have elevated that board into a much more strategic view of what is happening. And I hope and I think that if you ask partners that sit around that table, including officers from the Met, that board is now functioning in a much more focused and strategic way. So, for example, one of the things that we've looked at in great depth and we're really looking at is case file quality. Why is it that so many of the cases that go in between the CPS and the Met do not reach the standards? There's a real focus of work on that. We also, I've got the London Criminal Justice Board, I think, next week, and the focus is on victims. We have all the right partners around the table on that. So that is where part of that work is undertaken. Now, another large element, some of the other areas that we looked at from the London Crime Reduction Board was around violence. We now have the Violence Reduction Unit, and we have the Partnership Reference Group, which is chaired by the Mayor. And has all the partners round the table again. So what we have done in the setting up the London Policing Board is rightly thought is that we can't just put this on top of everything and there'd be duplication and the same partners coming to the different meetings but talking about very similar things. So we went through looking at where there would be duplication and where else it could go. And I think we have that governance structure. I think that we have that governance structure right. We have partners around the table at the right boards talking about the right things.
So it's the Crime Reference Group that deals with the crime reduction partnership work. So the London Criminal Justice, there's so many acronyms. The London Crime Reduction Board had on its agenda often performance of the Metropolitan, well, not often, every time there was a report from Deputy Commissioner around performance of the Metropolitan Police. So it was like a scrutiny process. That has gone to the London Policing Board. It then would have papers, for example, on disproportionality. We had papers from London councils on disproportionality. We have a disproportionality board that is now looking at that. So the governance and the landscape has changed, and it would have been wrong to just put London Policing Board directly on top of it. Look, I get that about the governance issues. What I'm asking about is when there is policy development and discussions going on about tackling crime in its forms and about those issues, where are those discussions taking place? And when you disturb that structure and make it as clear as possible, but maybe you could write back, both of you could write back with maybe if you have different perspectives about where those conversations take place, and also give us that landscape of where these conversations are, because it might actually have an impact on our future scrutiny work.
Yeah, there are just a few other things on the list just to add in as well. So we've mentioned the Criminal Justice Board. Deputy Mayor's mentioned the Violence Reduction Unit Advisory Board. There's the London Victims Board, the London Violence Against Women and Girls Board, and there's the London Contest Board. So there are a lot of people coming together, a lot of the same groups of people coming together to discuss crime and disorder related issues. Now,
not the governance issues, not holding, but working together to solve problems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's quite a crowded landscape. Now, you can always look at the landscape and say, actually, maybe there's a different way of doing that, but it's not an empty landscape.
I'm reassured, partly, but I'd like to see the detail now, and maybe we'll come back with some further questions.
Thank you. Assembly Member Desai, briefly.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, so as a scrutiny body, I see our role as being one of a critical friend of the Met. We don't just scrutinize your performance, we also ask questions about the welfare of your officers, amongst many other issues. So how do you see your relationship with us going forward? I know that we're talking about especially what happens after the elections on May the 2nd, but ask this question in a very general sort of way, and I don't think it's an unfair question to put to you this morning.
So, I've always enjoyed, and I use the word enjoy so smart, but it's a constructive, sort of in previous roles in when I was here in the Met before, and now a good and constructive relationship with this group, and I would like to do that going forward. The conversations that we're having at the moment are a volume pressure conversation which flow from the previous 2 or 3 questions. It's no more complex than that. There's no deliberate disrespect. It's simply a practical balance of time and effort of my senior team, who I want to spend most of their time helping drive the policing to be better for the people of London. So that's what we're trying to do. Whatever the future, we remain absolutely committed to the sort of scrutiny work that you do. I know we've had, I think, sort of well into double figures in the last year of officers, our subject matter experts, if you like, people at commander rank, etc., coming along for your scrutiny sessions on your sort of thematic piece of work you're doing on particular areas, and I'm sure that will continue. The balance of sort of scrutiny of sort of cross-Met activity with me and my senior team, when there's such a big new demand in the landscape, is bound to be different, and what that difference is, we just got to work our way through over the next few months.
Thank you, and I think the committee is extremely grateful for the attendance of your officers, and particularly the thematic meetings. We've had some really excellent contributions from officers that have been very informative about work that is going on in specialist areas of policing, and that is hugely important, I think, to Londoners, that we get to talk about that work that the Met is doing in public, and that people can sort of see that there is that scrutiny of that work going on. Sorry,
Commissioner, I must say that the session we had on economic crime and fraud was an eye-opener. And I did tell all of your staff to let you know that that was a Met at its best. I mean, some fantastic work being done there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You've still got your microphone on, Assembly Member Desai. I was going to say, I mean, we've had sort of excellent contributions, yes, on the money laundering and fraud, also on the investigation of serious road traffic collisions, and some of the work around young people affected by violence as well. And the contributions of your officers have been very much appreciated, and we also appreciate the dialogues that are going on at the moment, but we'll leave that out of this particular space right now. So I'm now going to move on to our next question, which is with Assembly Member Ahmed, and it's looking at a new Met for London 6 months on.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, panel. I've got this listed as for the Deputy Mayor, but I think it feels odd just to ask you this, Sophie, so I'm going to ask it to both of you. Is the approach to reform from the Met and from the Commissioner particularly working, and where do you feel that the real progress has been made over the last 6 months, and do you have evidence to support this? So, Deputy Mayor, if you'd like to start, and then we'll move on to the Commissioner.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think the new Met for London set out a really ambitious plan to reform the Met, and it needed to be, because as we've discussed in depth today and on other occasions, it absolutely needed transforming, not just in the culture but also in performance, and it needed transforming in terms of shifting the balance into the front lines, and decisions being taken around that. But also, what's important about the new Met for London for me is, and I think it goes back to the conversation you're having about child protection, is new Met for London doesn't only try to deal with individual issues, it's trying to deal with, as the Commissioner talked about, fixing the foundations, about what is its strategically it needs to change for the Met in order for it to be able to deliver for London. And I think if I'd been asked about the child protection thing, I think one of the issues for me, and you talked about it, is around supervision, around leadership, around training, and that is in the new Met for London. And you can see the beginnings, not the beginnings, you can see that being delivered at the moment. The leadership training that Mark has talked about and that was invested in by the Mayor in this year's budget, but also strongest ever neighbourhood policing, the dedicated ward officers, the PCSOs. Really importantly for me is, and I went last week with the Mayor to visit, because it's been such a fantastic success story, is that response to the public, and that's part of the new Met for London plans, as well as getting out of Engage around radically transforming the way in which calls are answered, how quickly they're answered, but also in terms of the response time. So an example of where things are working really well is that 91% of 999 calls are now answered within 10 seconds, which is up from 57% in June 2022. And you can see in that just fantastic transformation. So in terms of the new Met for London, of course, it's still early days. It was, the draft was published in January, and so when was it? July?
Published in June.
The final was June. Final was June. So we're still, it's still it will take time. The other major part is around integrity and around transforming the culture of the Met, and the significant shift that the Commissioner has undertaken in terms of being absolutely clear to officers about what the standards of behaviour that are expected, but also significant shift in misconduct and the grip on misconduct and the way in which that's been driven through. I think 57 officers have been dismissed within the last 6 months. You can see the shift in the figures, and you can feel that grip. So there's significant progress, but this is, it's not going to transform in 6 months or a year. It will take time.
Thank you. Commissioner, how's it going?
There's an awful lot to do. I'm sort of constantly so sort of impressed, grateful, sort of, and sometimes in awe of sort of how much the team of the Met, how much the good majority sort of want to do better for London, how hard people are working to make that happen. I think sort of just working through a few themes. So some of the foundational points, we talked about planning and those things earlier, so I won't label that. Some of the work we've started to do on technology that can have a practical effect on the street. So the use of investment in things like facial recognition technologies, improving the productivity of officers in hotspots by many-fold. The work we're doing in terms of using data to identify the most dangerous threat to women and girls from predatory men is producing some excellent results. We put effort into training, as the Deputy Mayor said. We've done a lot on starting to sort of tackle some of the underpinnings of culture in terms of how well officers are supported. So the equipment, the training, the technology, all the sort of things that go to actually, do I feel like I'm well supported in this organisation, or do I feel like I'm set up to fail? And that's a really important factor. We haven't got all the way there yet. We start to try and balance workload and demand, as we spoke about earlier. And then moving on to sort of more operational themes. So the Deputy Mayor mentioned Met CC. The last time, so the national target is answering 999 calls in 10 seconds. And the last year, the Met hit that target for a month was 2016. And in January, we hit it, having been high 80s for the previous 2 or 3 months, and having, as Deputy Mayor said, being sort of in the 50s sort of 18 months ago or so. So that's an immense amount of effort from the team in that environment to do that, which is brilliant. And that means we're answering emergency calls quicker, we're answering non-emergency calls quicker. And then the work we've done on demand on the streets, particularly the right care, right person work, which is a sort of big change and has gone as smoothly as you could hope. Actually, that means officers have got more time to do police work and are responding more quickly to calls as well. And so that flow through is good, and that then flows through into the work we're doing on victims. So we've got improved victim care programme, and we've increased the size of our victim desk, which is enabling more people to call us, and we've got various tools out there to help officers serve the public better, which is always their intent. Then if you go, so that was a big theme within the HMIC areas for engage, and pretty much all of that is ticked off or about to be ticked off from their list. On integrity issues, a lot falling out of Daniel Morgan independent inquiry, independent panel report. A lot of issues in there about sort of exhibits and sort of various processes and things that we've tackled, and those have again all been cleared or about to be cleared by HMIC, alongside the sort of work to put more officers into DPS and confront the sort of minority who let us down on standards. And the way the majority of officers have stepped forward and reported more cases and being part of that, this is not being done to the organisation. This has been done with the good majority. I've spoken earlier about the public protection numbers and starting to improve results in that, so I won't repeat that. Neighbourhoods, the sort of starting to get the resourcing to the right levels. I mean, there will always be abstractions, and it's a bit high at the moment because of the protest area, but that's much stronger, and the leaders have commented, let's say, on how that's going, and we'll formally launch the new model in the summer, which I'm really excited about. And sort of overall, we are tipping resources from specialist to local. Proactive review has moved lots of small teams, many of them central and distant from communities, onto BCUs, so that now each BCU has a team of around 160 officers who are there to be proactive in tackling crime. So by proactive, people who are going after wanted offenders, doing patrols on hotspots, people who are freed up to have the time to do that proactive work which prevents crime. That number will vary slightly from on the size of the BCU, but that's 4 teams covering almost the whole clock, 7 days a week, that can have a big effect. And so, and because of all of that, we are, I think, even with our resourcing challenges and police officer numbers going back in the worrying way that we spoke about earlier, as I mentioned, our sort of trust and confidence figures tend to be above the national average in policing and above, in most respects, the other city forces. And then on 3 areas of crime, a sort of an honest take on how we're doing with the pressures we've got. So the public protection world is going in the right direction, but there's still more to do there, but sort of some positive work there. Serious violence is sort of, I think, decent performance in the sense of it's still well below in most respects what it was pre-COVID. Some of the numbers have crept up this year, but sort of some of them, like sort of firearms offences and murders, haven't. So it's finely balanced, but it's still far better than pre-COVID. Our biggest challenge. So I've talked about public protection crime, other serious violence crime. The biggest challenge is in volume. The volume is where we are struggling in terms of prevention and detection. So areas like robbery and theft from person are going up quite substantially. And because of our capacity issues, because we're prioritising those areas of risk and harm and prioritising communities, those are some of the areas where we are sort of most stretched, and that's a particular challenge, and we're trying to put some more resources in this year. So I think so that's my sort of, I know it's 5 minutes, but that's my take on sort of we're making progress in change, and we've got some results to show for it, but it's the sort of start of a big journey.
Okay, thank you. And you talked about the challenges there. I mean, are there other challenges and where you'd like to see more progress? And before you answer, would you mind moving your microphone just a little bit closer, please? Thank you. I know we've had tech problems this morning. Thank you.
So I'm not going to go through piece by piece. We've set some very, very ambitious deadlines, and some of them are going to slip. And now, so one example, so this year, the work on, say, Victims Focus Desk has been good. The work on the proactive review, we set an ambitious deadline of introducing it all before Christmas. As it was, we introduced it on 2 BCUs before Christmas and 10 afterwards. So I'm sort of, I'd rather set ambitious deadlines, and if we slip on a couple of them, then we just need to be pragmatic about that. Whilst all this is going on, I should have mentioned we've had some big high-risk technology programs. The second part of our Connect system goes live next week, and so we've got a lot of work gone into that, and sort of getting to that final nervous week ahead, and that will make a big difference getting through that program for us. We are now going through a process of resetting. So the budget process introduces some new opportunities, and because we have, and also some new challenges with making some of the savings that we've committed to. So we're resetting our timetable now as we go forward.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, what would you see as the biggest challenges and where more progress needs to be made?
So I think we've talked about it already in terms of budget and funding is a huge challenge, and the ability of the Commissioner to be able to, we've talked about civilianisation and trying to get police officers out of back office roles and onto the front line. That is a huge challenge. It really is a huge challenge. I think there's a massive challenge around, I think the biggest challenge is shifting the culture. I think there's, a huge amount of work is being undertaken in that area, but I mean shifting the culture internally and the behaviour internally, and then shifting the culture and the perception of that culture amongst Londoners. I think that's a massive challenge. I think that a lot of work has happened around violence against women and girls, and there's significant work. I think a big challenge is making sure that capacity and that drive is equally shared amongst other sections of officers, such as black officers and the black community. I think that's going to be a significant challenge in how you shift that, because those perceptions and the some of the damage that has happened in the past are long living, and it will take a long time to move that. But internally, that is also a challenge because of capacity.
Thank you. And finally, Commissioner, there were, and you have alluded to these, but if we could sort of just go into them in a little bit more detail. There were 70 key changes listed in a new Met for London to be delivered by July 23 and February 24. How many of these have been completed?
That's not a number I'm holding in my head. So we had we've had a look at that sort of at regular management board meetings, as you'd expect, in terms of tracking those completed, those on track, those that have slipped. So we can sort of give you a summary of progress so far. And as I say, at the moment, we're just doing a reset of our timeline. Now we've got different strands of work that we've got to do as a consequence of the budget.
Could you give us a written update on where we are with each of those key issues and initiatives, please?
I think sort of trying to sort of save bureaucracy. I think when we reset our plan as part of the budget process over the next couple of months, I think as part of that we'll have as a public document, this is the ground we've covered and this is how we're resetting. So I think that should answer that question.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Duval.
The new Met plan for London, or the new London delivery plan, states that all senior leaders across the Met will be able to account for how they listen to, collaborate with and deliver for communities to ensure Londoners get what they need. How is the Met holding these officers to account, and what's been the results in your view?
So we've completely reset the internal accountability system in terms of performance management. So in the new Met for London plan, we talk about the three sets of outcomes, don't we, around more trust, less crime, high standards, and you'd have seen the measures in there about that. So we have we consider the performance at management board on a sort of periodic basis. There's a performance group that drives and coordinates that across London, and then there's each BCU and each specialist unit has its own set of own data pack that it drives its performance forward through, and that then connects into the operational tasking, coordinating the resources. So we've built sort of from scratch a system to enable us to do that, and all senior leaders are being held to account. There wasn't a system in place beforehand that I thought was as robust as it needs to be, so we've got version 1 out there. It's working well. Only about 3 or 4 weeks ago, the Deputy Commissioner and I took a day to sort of visit 2 BCUs. So I went to one, she went to another, where we sat through sort of their performance meeting and their subsequent operational tasking meeting, and that was really good to see how it's bedding in. And I sort of think, actually, yeah, we've got to, from my perspective, we've got to version 1. We've got something, I can see it's working. I see it's starting to drive performance, and of course it needs to improve, but that's great to have got that established over this year. And now they've got sort of a more clearer flexibility locally with the proactive teams, and they've got the leadership team at a borough level with the sort of superintendents. The balance of driving the organisation is changing.
Now, of course, those mechanisms that you described have changed over the years in terms of the Met. Just can you paint a picture of how one of those meetings went, what you observed in terms of not the borough that you went to, but in terms of talking about good performance, poor performance, and issues of that? How does it work?
So the performance meeting, they've got a pack in front of them, which is the same pack across the organisation. Which has been built sort of involving them and sort of and with that sort of experts at the centre, and it goes across all the performance areas. Because it's such a high priority for us, I would focus maybe in this conversation on violence against women and girls. So that section, what I was really pleased to see is, on top of outcome performance measures, e.g. rape detection rates, so a BCU commander can see what his or her is and comparative in terms of the rest of the force and versus targets, etc. But if you were the BCU commander, it's one thing knowing whether you're sort of how well you're doing, but you also want to understand what's going on underneath that, don't you? And so there was then a sort of a diagnostics pile of spreadsheet of data behind it, which basically looked at about 25 different metrics like speed of attendance at scene, arrest rate at sort of for domestic violence, sort of number of victim dropouts, case file quality, all the different parts of the process, so that actually if you're concerned about your performance as BCU commander on rate because it's relatively low, you look across them and say, actually, where are the areas that we're weak? And having a conversation then with the sort of your lead detectives in that area, saying, okay, well, what we're going to do to improve these weaknesses, and how will that feed through into our overall performance? So really thinking hard about everything from victim care to speed of attendance, the whole system. So it's like any big complicated organisation. You need data in front of you to drive the right activity, because I think sometimes people think that improving the policing for London, there might be a magic lever. If only there was. There isn't a magic lever. You need to sort of point yourselves in the right direction, organise yourselves better, but fundamentally it then comes down to hard yards. It comes down to hard yards of going through the detail, understanding where you're succeeding, understanding where you're failing, and step-by-step improvement. So that performance meeting is looking at that systematic approach, and then the tasking meeting that follows it is then diving down into the short term. So over the last 2 or 3 weeks, maybe have we had some hotspots for sexual offences in town centres, or has there been a change in pattern, or there's been a crime series related to indecent exposure, things like that. So looking at those issues, what's our number of wanted offenders? Are we on top of our outstanding offenders? Yep. Looking at all those tactical issues and staying on top of them. So you've got the performance and policy driving through the operations. And it's the tasking group that deals with, look, I know it's the wrong word, but the poor performing areas, the areas where we're not quite doing well on, it's then dealt with in the tasking group. The immediate operational priorities, yeah. So if there's so like if you say you've got a hotspot, so actually we've identified there's a hotspot for theft of mobile phones from people that's grown up in this area. Who's got a plan? What we're going to do about it? Sort of, is it targeting offenders? Is it hotspot patrols? Are we working with partners in terms of some target hardening? So it's all of that work is done in that group. Okay. If I can return to the Deputy Mayor. So in terms of the new Met for London states that in July-August 23, the Met Zero Tolerance approach to discrimination takes full effect. How are you assured that this has been embedded across the Met, and how is MOPAC holding the Met to account on this commitment, and what is it? What's the different as a result? What's different as a result?
So that's part of the way in which we undertake oversight, which is on a number of levels, either the bilats that I have with the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner, as well as Assistant Commissioners, but also MOPAC officers directly being part of the groups that are, operationally delivering this within the Met. So MOPAC officers attend a lot of several MPS meetings to monitor the progress of this and seek assurances, and it includes the monthly performance meeting with the commander in charge of the DPS, professionalism reference group and the counter-corruption steering group, as well as vetting, and also looking at the transformation project board, which is around the professional standards units. So there is a lot of oversight in that as well. And of course, the London Policing Board has had this culture, this issue on the agenda for the People and Culture Board as well as the London Policing Board, and I'm sure that at the next London Policing Board, Mark will be reporting in his Commission's report on progress on this area. In terms of embedding, anti-discrimination and zero tolerance, the things that we will be looking at are indicators around misconduct, what has changed within the misconduct process, but really importantly, what has changed in terms of those going into the misconduct process, because that is where the biggest amount of disproportionality actually lies. We're also looking at the use of continuing to look at the use of police powers. We're doing a piece of work around getting underneath that so that we can understand where the disproportionality that is so clear as to whether that is what is driving that disproportionality. So we have a number of pieces of work to do that, and we're also, just in terms of what the Commissioner's just been outlining in terms of the tasking, we have a piece of work within MOPAC to look at how is the tasking and the vision and the drive from management board going down into the BCUs and to that tasking, and can you see that thread? And we have that piece of work underway.
Okay. You rightly, I think, I raised with you, why didn't we have a review of MOPAC at the same time as we've made these other changes in terms of going on? And I think you rightly come back and said, look, that would be a bit of a diversion of time. But you, I think in your answers, you indicated there would be changes in the way that MOPAC carried out its work. And the problem is, if we had a review, we'd be able to monitor what those changes were, because we'd see the recommendations and see how you've performed against those. So can you just outline, even 6 months on, what you think the changes in the way MOPAC is dealing with its work now, in terms of holding the MPS to account in light post Casey? Where do we think we are? Because there must be some changes, because this change agenda you've outlined today in all the answers that we've had is quite huge. So tell us where MOPAC's changed and what you think they've been, what it's been.
So I think MOPAC is still changing. I don't think that's a finished journey, and it's still bringing in some capacity around expertise, but also capacity around making sure that in the work that we do is visible and transparent to Londoners. So some of the work that we do is available via the dashboards and the evaluations, and we're doing work around that to make sure that is transparent, accountable, and that can be seen, and the value added can be seen. In terms of, if you take, I think I've outlined for you in terms of trying to lift up from the tactical to the strategic, and to make sure that the London Policing Board and that thread from the London Policing Board all the way down to officers sitting on reference groups, that's where the oversight happens, and that's where the MOPAC has improved its oversight, I think. I think in terms of what difference has that made? We still have to be able to prove that. It's been 6 months on from this milestone, but a year on from Casey, we have definitely improved those processes, but we have to be able to show what difference that has made. We can point to that through work that we've done through New Met for London, work that we've done through the Child First, as well as the Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan. But it's a journey, and we have a job of work to do to be able to communicate that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I just circle back a couple of questions and bring in Assembly Member Pigeon, who has a follow-up?
Yep, on your New Met for London 17 actions, and we were talking about children's earlier, and I've now pulled it up in front of me, and you were supposed to have produced your new children and young people strategy in November last year, and you were working with key partners and experts and making sure the voices of children and young people were heard and reflected in it. So clearly that work has slipped. Does that ring any bells? Is there anything more you can tell us about that? And if not, can we have something in writing very quickly, please?
So the work has started and is quite advanced, but there's still quite a lot to do to get it to, I think, capture that difficult balance I was talking about earlier between sort of the enforcement with children, balance with the support and the safeguarding responsibilities, and that's the work the team are.
Really.
That's what's made it really difficult and challenging. And also, it's the same people doing that strategy who have been doing all the hard yards in public protection in terms of improving some of the outcomes that we spoke about earlier. So that's an example of setting ambitious dates, and some of them, in hindsight, being harder than we anticipated.
Do you have any idea of when we might expect to? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Was that Assemblymember Prince wanting? Very speedily, we're coming to the very end.
It's on a slightly different subject, and I promise you I'm not having a dig, I'll try and have a go. On your estate strategy, I'm just trying to establish if it's likely that anything will change within the next year, really, whether, and I know it's a big project you've got to do, you've got to relook at everything, but there are some police stations that were at one point offered up for sale. They've been taken off that, which is, I fully understand that. And I just wondered whether there would be any movement within the next 12 months really on that.
Yeah, so I would expect us to have the strategy finished within 12 months. So it is a massive, and sooner than that, frankly. What's that? End of a long meeting. It's a massive challenge to reset it, and sort of there are several factors within it. Two of the biggest ones that create the reset are the sort of sale of properties and the sort of to invest in technology and better estates. I think it has got to a point where I'm concerned about, we now have close to 100 wards where there isn't a base where a neighbourhood team can be within a 20-minute patrol time of that on foot, which was an initial commitment, which was changed over time. I'm concerned about that if you're really trying to value that connection locally, whether that works. And that doesn't have to be a police base, it may be with partners and things, but we've got to work our way through that. The second issue is the current strategy assumes some, in some departments, some fairly ambitious sort of working from home proportions, which might have been pragmatic during COVID, but I'm not sure are long-term solutions. And of course, that affects the number of desk spaces you need, etc. So we have to do a lot of work to double-check desk occupancy and what we actually need in resetting that. So you reset those two big issues alongside lots of other complicating factors. Probably another big one is the sort of the green agenda, particularly our fleet issues. A fleet that will have to move over, sort of ignoring frankly ignoring legal dates and sort of other ambitions. Frankly, just the way the market is changing, we will have to move. And actually, when you're using police cars 24/7 and the charging facilities, that gets really complicated. So there's some big factors in there. You put all that in the melting pot and have to reset something for the whole organisation alongside some more tactical issues, like in some places we don't have enough locker space for officers to store their kit. You add all that together, it's quite a big reset. So that's, and I don't think any of those things won't make sense to you as ambitions, but actually the maths and the logistics to make it make sense is taking some time.
It's really just if we're likely to see disposals within the next 12 months. From what you're saying, I know it's not a bad thing. So I think once you've sold it, it's gone.
So I think we sort of get the strategy on hopefully over the next few months and get that finalised, and then of course there's an ambition in terms of what we'd like to do. There's then there's current cost assumptions based on the pre-existing sort of sales and things planned. It's sort of actually if you're having more community bases and fewer sales, that has a big impact on budget, and so that we have to look at the realism of that and have a conversation with Deputy Mayor and others. So it's a massive reset.
Thank you. I've had a request from Assembly Member Devonish to send the committee an org chart of all the different bodies and groups that have been, and the rejigging that has gone on, because that would be incredibly helpful to us all. Thank you. So really, I just want to thank you both for coming this morning, for all your answers to our many and varied questions. So can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we note the monthly report from MOPAC? And can we delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note the work programme for the 23-24 Assembly year? Not much left of it yet to go now. And the next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the 6th of March 2024 at 10 o'clock in the chamber here at City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.
This is the broadcast from City Hall.